welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Richard Rhames from Biddeford. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me on again.
Good to have you. Richard is a small farmer and longtime political activist and, can I say, troublemaker in Maine?
I try.
Yeah, you do your best at it.
Well, I don't know if I do my best, but I try occasionally. Yeah.
All right. We're going to talk about what's happening in Augusta and across the nation as right-wing governors are moving rapidly to further destroy social progress. Give us your take on the situation.
Well, I guess first I would have to say that it's sadly not just the so-called right-wing governors. You've got Cuomo in New York. You've got Jerry Brown, theoretically a liberal.
In California?
In California. And they're pursuing much the same policies that are being pursued in states like Wisconsin and in Maine. So the problem is this toxic soup we call a political culture in this country. You know, I guess it was Milton Friedman that Naomi Klein quoted in her book. Basically, the shock doctrine. Yeah. And Friedman famously said that in a crisis, the response is made up of the ideas that are laying around. And especially since the end of World War II, the right wing, rich people have invested their money in essentially rolling back the New Deal and the ideas that were behind the New Deal and replacing the ideology of the country and altering the politics to essentially get back to the 19th century.
Back to the days of feudalism.
That's going a little further, but yeah, sure. There was some social progress, egalitarian it's called, in that the prosperity that we enjoyed in this country from the mid-30s up through the early 70s, that was broadly shared. On balance, people at the very top of the pyramid did somewhat less well than they had done historically in the golden age of the robber baron days. And ordinary people did better. And living standards generally improved. Now that prosperity was not shared, completely. Black people, for instance, lagged well behind after effects of institutional slavery. But generally speaking, for white folks, there was this general rise in prosperity.
And unions had a lot to do with that.
Unions had a lot to do with that. Collective action that unions sponsored. There was at one point something called a labor movement that you didn't have to laugh or use a sense of irony to talk about. And there was substantial penetration in the public sector and the private sector where people basically could use their collective power to withhold their labor, to gain advantages for themselves and their families. And up through the early 70s, it was still possible for one wage earner in a family to make enough in the so-called marketplace so that a family could have a decent living, and the expectation was that their kids would do even better than they did. There was a rollback that started, and in the mid-70s, it was consciously done. And now everybody is pretty well aware that it's the rare family that can survive on one income. Meanwhile...
And many people are working 2 and 3 jobs.
Absolutely, sure, yeah. So, and meanwhile, the stock market is careening along, and people at the top are doing very, very well. I mean, you talk about this 1% of the population has corralled most of the wealth. So we're in a kind of this interesting rollback time where people generally are on the down escalator.
Now, George W. Bush, when he was president, they talked about one of his chief advisors, Karl Rove, as being Bush's brain. Well, Karl Rove, I once read, said that his favorite president was William McKinley, not one that we normally think of as one of our great presidents in American history. Why was Karl Rove talking about William McKinley?
Well, you know, we talked about this. You were kind enough to come down and be on our show down in Biddeford. We got our own little sort of progressive echo chamber. And this matter of William McKinley, again, William McKinley, 19th century, the effort that's going on right now is not just about rolling back the last 20 or 30 years. The LePage, the governors across the nation, with more or less ferocity, are essentially on track to try to repeal the 20th century. Get back to the good old days of the 19th century, the days of the robber barons. That's the time when McKinley was around. There were essentially no taxes on wealthy people. There was very little in the way of organized working folks. It was everybody had the freedom to contract individually, right?
No public
child labor,
no public education.
No public education. Well, there was, but it was only, back in those days you had to buy your own school books. There were all of these filters that kept ordinary people of working class parents, out of the school system.
And there was the poorhouse, right?
There was a poorhouse or a poor farm, yeah. And the other thing about McKinley, which I think speaks volumes about Rove's love of him, was that McKinley presided over the first outright imperial push of the United States, the Spanish-American War, the war on the Philippines. And back in those days, I think the senator's name, I think it was Beveridge, he wasn't alone, but he was one of the main exponents of imperialism and the white man's burden, all that stuff. People ought to look it up, because it's so refreshing by comparison to today that these guys weren't ashamed. You know, you had all these darkies out there in the rest of the world, and they had what we wanted, you know.
Resources.
And so, because we were bigger and stronger, we needed to take it. And also, we had this wonderful Christianity. You know, these were savages out there.
So God blessed us.
Yeah. Yeah.
God wanted us to do this.
It was the prime directive. And McKinley famously said, you know, that he stayed up one night, you know, pondering this and just decided that this was, you know, moving God's message out to the Philippines, and doing this was just the mission that America should be on. Like I say, it was compared to today, with this crap about democracy promotion and nation building and all this. This is you know, frosting. You know, back in the good old days of McKinley, they weren't afraid to talk about what was actually going on. And back then, we sort of had a vestige of an alternate party. The Democratic Party back in those days actually opposed on principle the idea of imperialism. Mark Twain, there was an anti-imperialist league that Mark Twain and a bunch of other people, Mark Twain was maybe the most famous of the anti-imperialists, but it makes for interesting reading to go back and look at that stuff, back when people could actually have a principled conversation that didn't insult your intellect about what this new path that America was on.
And so how does all that translate to Maine today? What's going on in Maine? What do you think Governor LePage's agenda is in Maine? Well,
he's very clear about what his agenda is. You know, he wants to, and his agenda, quite frankly, is Mr. Obama's agenda. LePage, a couple of 3 weeks ago, was, you know, doing his usual thing, talking about we have to make Maine more business friendly. This was around the time of the, and that, I mean, that's been his rap right along. Somehow, these crazy environmentalists, tree huggers and such like, these greedy workers, they're all bleeding the vitality out of the state of Maine. All these people on welfare, don't you know? Immigrants, of course, yeah, those swarthy people, but that has a long history in the United States. Anyway, so around that same time, I was interested that Obama does his State of the Union speech, and he's talking about competitiveness. And really, there was very little difference between Obama's rap now and Mr. LePage's rap. It's sort of vintage Calvin Coolidge, William McKinley. We gotta improve the business climate. We gotta take away these pesky regulations that people fought for, through the 20th century to create. You gotta take them off the table, and allow a sort of 19th century
corporate
climate.
state.
Yeah, where we can have the rise of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and that sort of thing again. And it's trickled down all the way. It's Ronald Reaganism. And when Obama was running for president, he freely talked about the excesses, the supposed excesses of the 1960s, and announced that one of his heroes was Ronald Reagan. And he's implementing policies that Ronald Reagan would have been proud of.
So you're saying that both political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, by and large, are running a corporate agenda.
Yeah, corporate agenda. I mean, corporations are, eternal things. They live forever. They have almost unlimited power. They have no liability under the law. But let's remember that they are simply tools that are used by wealthy people. They are not democratic institutions. And
tools to accumulate capital.
To accumulate power and wealth. Right. They're cudgels that are used by the rich people that have always been with us. The people that founded the country were by and large rich people. They set up a system that was largely immune to popular sovereignty toward the will of the majority. They were very clear about that. And that system prevails.
In Maine, there's an organization called the Maine Heritage Policy Center. Mm-hmm. Who are they, and have they taken over the state?
Well, they're on the way, but like I say, they've got a lot of company. They're another one of these tools. They were, as I understand it, an offshoot of. There's an outfit called the Heritage Foundation, which is one of these right-wing so-called think tanks
in Washington.
In Washington, they're funded by these rich families. I'm not sure. I think Adolph Coors heirs are funding the Heritage Foundation. There are a number of very wealthy families. The Koch brothers are KOCH. They're very much in the news because of their connection to Scott Walker out in Wisconsin. But, they fund, was it Americans for Prosperity? They have all of these vehicles that they use, tools. Mm-hmm. They have big hammers and they have little hammers, okay? And these things are in use when my understanding was that when it looked like Maine was, after decades of work, when Maine actually was in striking distance of enacting a single-payer healthcare system, the determination was made at the federal level, we need to put some sappers into Maine.
Some what? Sappers.
It's a military term. You work behind enemy lines and basically blow away the opposition. And so they installed the so-called Maine Heritage Policy Center. Early on, they brought William F. Buckley to the state. They brought Grover Norquist, shrink government to the size where you can drown it in the bathtub. Yeah, that Grover Norquist. Basically, spokesman for the rich. And the rich decided that if they were going to beat back this socialist enterprise, this effort to bring the state of Maine into the company of civilized nations, then this needed to be fought on the ground. So they basically funded this outfit, cherry-picked some people that were able to draw the big salaries and were known. This guy, Taryn Bragdon, that's the head of it now, I guess. Bragdon was in the Maine legislature. Kathleen McGee actually knew him back when he was in the legislature. He was picked as the local guy, and he's sort of the mouthpiece. And LePage took him into his transition team. LePage has now installed, don't remember the guy's name, but another functionary from within the Maine Heritage Policy Center who did a couple of years as a teacher. He's now the Commissioner of Education. So these guys have a sort of, they have a way of talking about the world. They have a plan. And these guys work every day of every year, working out a way of talking about the world, talking points, and then a program for getting from where we are in the shadow of the 20th century to where they want to go, the 19th century. And Governor LePage has used these guys to implement an agenda that he agrees with that will benefit the Chamber of Commerce and the usual suspects.
I would venture a guess that a high percentage of Governor LePage's votes came from alienated, marginalized, working class people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why would working class people vote for a program and a leader that is working really against their own interests? Why does that happen?
How long a show we got?
We've got about 10 minutes left.
Well,
so give me the
voting against interest is typical. Rich people never vote against their own interests, but you know they've been to the finest schools. They clearly understand, you know, where their interests lie, and they're not shy about promoting them. Okay, ordinary people who live downstream from all of that stuff rely on things like corporate media to understand the world and what's happening to them. And since Slick Willie Clinton implemented NAFTA, the working class used to be reliably Democratic in its voting habits. But when the Democrats began doing this crap, turning away from universal health care, implementing so-called free trade agreements that you know, it was obvious it was going to wind up offshoring much of the productive industrial base of the United States. At some point, you know, people who would have voted for a Democratic Party that looked after their economic interests, as to some extent the Democratic Party had in the past, not completely, but there was enough there to keep people in the system. Once Clinton, and What's the Matter with Kansas, that's a great book that talks about that, among other things. Anyway, once the economic incentive to vote Democratic was gone, I think a lot of the working class began to follow this identity politics, began to respond to the racist, the homophobic, the so-called cultural issues.
Abortion.
Abortion, sure.
Prayer.
Yeah.
Flag burning.
Yeah, all that stuff. All this red meat that really is a distraction,
Pure
quite
emotion.
frankly.
Pure
yeah,
emotion.
Yeah, or impure emotion, if you will.
So you're saying that the working class people aren't very smart? Is that what you're saying?
Sure, working people are as smart as anybody, but they're not encouraged and they're not given the tools to understand what's happening to them.
So they're being taken for a ride by
Absolutely.
by the rich and the right-wing organization.
Yeah. There's a interesting thing I read the other day. This guy, Mark Ames, he spent some time, he and Matt Taibbi, I think, were part of this outfit. They lived over in Russia for a while after the changes, when the Soviet Union became Russia. And Mark was talking about one of these scrub jobs that he had for a while. And he replaced this woman who had been doing data entry working class person at the very bottom, really. And she was going to move up one step. She was going to a corral, you know, the other side of the space, right? She was going to get a little more an hour, and Mark was replacing her. And he told a story about how she's poor white, and she was saying that, you know, she didn't like Clinton. She liked Bush because he was real. And here's Clinton, who was actually trailer trash, right? I mean, Clinton, you know, he was like Obama. He was somebody who actually was, you know, was looking to be a comer, cut his own deal, you know, do well for himself. But how could she, you know, support George W. Bush as quote unquote real? I mean, here's this yuppie with a silver spoon in his mouth, the cokehead, all the rest of it. I mean, you know, I don't know his coke abuse against him or his drinking, but, you know, he was obviously a product of the wealthy elite, and yet he put on his belt buckle and his cowboy boots like Reagan,
and
right?
He drove a pickup truck.
And he drove a pickup truck. I mean, but like I say,
that was all theater, though, right?
Exactly. But if all you know about the world is what you see on TV, you got to be forgiven for, I think, for drawing the wrong conclusions about the way the world works.
So in Madison, Wisconsin, as we speak, people are being dragged out by the state police of the Capitol after the recent events there. In Maine, there's effort by our governor to lower taxes on the wealthy, also get rid of the estate tax on the wealthy in our state, and to dramatically, over a period of a couple years, slash really across the board in social spending. What has been the response of the opposition party, the Democrats in the state of Maine, to Governor LePage's moves?
You're suggesting the Democrats are an opposition party?
You're a Democrat, right?
Well,
are you not a registered Democrat?
I still am. Yeah.
Okay. What about
I would just suggest though that you're suggesting LePage is the one who wants to lower marginal rates on wealthy people.
Well, he's the governor.
He's the governor, but Baldacci, a titular Democrat, was the governor before that, and Baldacci's Democratic Party in the legislature that held majorities in both houses actually passed a so-called tax reform package that would have lowered the top marginal rate. This is a bipartisan undertaking. As I say, the Heritage Foundation, all of these clone organizations that are devoted to rolling back the 20th century, that is, both parties subscribe to that doctrine, all right? And I mean, LePage is a problem for working people, for the social fabric of this state. He's not a good guy to have as the governor. On the other hand, Baldacci wasn't either. And I think we shouldn't be led into the kind of thinking that we saw, you know, during the 2000s, where anybody but LePage, no. Anybody but Bush, no. Look, we got Obama. Okay, we might have had Kerry reporting for duty, right? I mean, this is a poverty-stricken political culture or worse, and we do ourselves no favors by thinking that there's some kind of white knight out there that's going to save us. This rot is very, very deep.
So with that said, and we have 5 minutes left, Mr. Rhames, I just want to remind you. With that said, what do we do? How do we get out from behind this 8 ball?
Well, people have to understand what the larger game is. They have to some extent turn off the TV or go to their local access station and start doing TV themselves. And they got to start reading. They got to join together with other people and collectively try to figure out what the game is that's being run on them and their kids and their grandkids.
What if they figured out, but they just kind of, you know, lost hope? And suddenly, though, seeing things happen in Madison, Wisconsin, maybe has given them a little spark that, you know, of hope. But long term, it's going to be hard slogging against these forces, these corporate forces that are dominating both political parties, I think, as you well described.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, you know, we were saying before the show, there's an old saying in labor that the boss is the best organizer. And the thing that's happening in Wisconsin, and less reported, but I mean, an even more ferocious rollback is happening in Michigan, Ohio. This is going on all over the place, okay? And people have been lulled into, to some extent, a false sense of security. They don't know how close they are to the edge. And LePage and the governor in Scott Walker in Wisconsin and these other political power wielders are basically delivering a 2x4 to the head of the working class. And you know, like the thing with the mule, first thing you got to get his attention. You hit him between the eyes with a hammer, right? That's what Scott Walker is doing. Now, what the response of the working class to all of this has yet to be determined. But I think that in Wisconsin and you know, not too long from now in Maine, people who hold power are going to basically motivate people to figure out, you know, whether it's raining or not.
Let me share this with you. I want to share this figure with you. When you add up all of the debt of all of the states in the country, now there are 46 states in fiscal crisis, like Maine, it comes to $130 billion. $130 billion of combined national debt. Well, this year, the U.S. will spend on our wars and occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan. We'll spend $170 billion just on the wars in those countries this year. We're saying that if you take that money, bring our war dollars home, you can literally cover all of the debt of all of the states in the country, and you begin to get rid of this false story that it's the workers' fault. We've got to slash social spending and destroy social progress. To that, in order to project this message even further, we believe that the local politicians in Maine, local communities, the state politicians, have to begin to call for an end to war spending if we're going to help solve our economic crisis. There's going to be a rally by the statewide Bring Our War Dollars Home coalition in Augusta on Monday, April 4th at 11 o'clock in the Hall of Flags on the second floor of the state capitol. That's Monday, April 4th at 11 a.m. Bring Our War Dollars Home. We're going to be making the connections between this out-of-control war spending and economic crisis at home. Richard Rhames, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching another edition of this issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and
please get organized.
Please get organized. That's it. Thanks a lot. Great job, Richard.